like to welcome you to the Historical Heartbeats lecture series, Blood, Sweat, Toil, and Tears. We're in for a very interesting evening, and I would like to thank our tour guide and lecturer. I'm sure he needs no introduction, but Dr. Edward Harris, the director of the Bermuda Maritime Museum, and he is also a world famous archaeologist and author. If any of you have seen Bermuda Forts, this is a very fine publication that Dr. Harris has put together. We have an opportunity this evening to see Casemates. Let me explain to you how we're going to run the tour this evening. What we're going to do is we're going to start down here and with Dr. Harris, and we're going to actually go through the gate. When we go through the gate, I will take your tickets along with Doreen Aubrey. Where are you, Doreen? Doreen somewhere here. Anyway, sorry. Oh, she's over there. Okay. We'll take your tickets as we go through the gate. We're going to spend about 45 minutes here at Casemates, and we're going to come back down here. We're going to have some water here for you because you'll probably need it by then. And at that point, we're going to take a stroll over to Commissioner's House. When we get to Commissioner's House, our other two lecturers, our very fine lecturers, Mr. James E. Smith, author of Slavery in Bermuda, and Andrew Birmingham, who is the president of the Bermuda Historical Society. We're going to split into two groups. And Mr. Birmingham is going to take one half of the groups to High Cave to talk about the Boer prisoners of war and the convicts in World War I and World War II. Get off the road. And James E. Smith is going to talk about slavery in Bermuda. You'll also have a chance to see Graham Foster's mural there at the Commissioner's House. And so when we split the two groups, you'll spend about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll do a switch, okay? So everybody will have a chance to see. So thank you for bearing with us. Our sound system this evening is having technical difficulties, so we'll just ask while there's talking if you could keep your talking to a minimum so that everyone can hear. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Edward Harris.
Well, welcome to the Casemates Barracks. First thing I'd like to say is that everything's in the name, and it really ought to be called the Casemated Barracks. And the reason for that is it has a casemate roof. The building behind us here, you see all that brickwork there? That's a casemated construction in brick to make the building bomb-proof against incoming cannonballs. In the great Casemate Barracks on the hill, they hid the brickwork behind that false row of windows. So the roof there is about 6 foot thick up on the Casemate Barracks, and that's where its name derives from. Now, this evening we're going to go into here. This was the original cafe or bakery for the Dockyard, and we're going to show you the bread ovens that we found. And then we're going to stop here at the archaeological dig right by the fence, and then we're going to go up to the Casemate Barracks and straight up onto the roof. Now, when I say onto the roof, it's a roof well, so it's a 6 foot well that you stand in order to look over the edge. You have to go up a couple of steps and you can look over the edge. So it's not like when we stand on top of a Bermuda roof. A couple of quick other things here. You'll know this road. A lot of work has been done on this road recently. And the original plan to make this two-way was to keep the gate as it originally was and knock down the gatehouse and this large wall just to your right, which is what's left of the original fortifications. The fortifications originally marched down behind these buildings and went straight overboard, as it were. An alternative plan was suggested because the knocking down of the gatehouse did not include widening the gate. And the gate, for those of you familiar with Dockyard, the gate was slowly being eaten away by trucks and buses and things hitting it. And so it was suggested we widen the gate. This gate on this side was taken apart stone by stone, in some cases more than one stone, because the cement in it, the mortar in it was so strong that when we lifted it apart, we took 2 or 3 blocks at once. It was all reassembled like you see it there. The coats of arms, which the museum has the original of, were remade in fiberglass and painted up, and the end result we think is very, very good and is the best that could have been done in the circumstance. Now, before we did that, we had to knock down the old prison wall that was here. Many of you remember that. Some of you may have had occasion to go inside and remember it. I was down here one day talking about blood, sweat, and tears, and I was standing here. We had some volunteers working up top, and this truck came down the hill, and I looked at the name on the side of the truck. I said, "Hello, cousin, what are you doing up there?" And he looked at me, he didn't know it was my cousin, but he was my cousin, the White Cross. And so what are you doing up there? He said, "Oh, I just went to see my old home." And I said, "Oh, really? What were you in for?" "Well, in 10 years for this," or whatever, and so forth. Anyway, I missed it, and the photographer missed it, because apparently he went up and he got a couple of volunteers and said, "I want to show you my cell, come on in." So he went into the cell with them, looked around, says, "This is where I lived for 10 years. And he went over the corner and he pulled out a tile, and he said, "That's where I kept my stash when I was in here." Back. I'm doing, which I'll explain to you. For the last 3.5 years, we've been coming in largely on Saturdays and other days with volunteers to basically remove the 1960s prison architecture, such as it was, and get back to the original historic buildings. And so I explained that to him, and he said, "Yeah, I know all about it. I spent 15 years now. That's cool." So I went back to the office and consulted with the ladies in the office because they know what's happening. So I said, "You know so-and-so, so-and-so?" They said, "That's right." "Yes, I know him." "Well, he was in Casemates." "Yes, he was." "Well, what did he do?" "Well, he killed his mother." I said, oh. And then there was silence. Then a couple minutes later, the voice said, "But she deserved it." Come inside. Now, there's a bit of a tight space here, but you can mill in, and then once some of you have seen it, I'll explain the situation twice in here. But basically, no, I'll tell you what, I'll explain to you now. When you used to visit people in prison, because I presume none of you had to go through for the real reason, you went through and there were 2 security gates, and then you went into the visiting room. And what we basically did, and we've been doing with everything, is going in and you just rip everything out by hand because you can't get machines inside of the building. And when we took down the ceiling, we found there was a brick wall, the false ceiling put in the 96. There was a brick wall behind it, most of which had been plastered up. And so we then scraped off all the plasters, and what you'll see when you go inside now, and what we'll do is just let people go in and have a look and come back out and wait here. And I want the flashlights inside, please. Whoever's got the flashlights, Johnny and what name. We scraped the wall off, and we found the 2 enormous bread ovens for the Dockyard. So when you worked in the Dockyard and you wanted something for morning tea or coffee and so on, you came here to pick up your bread. And they're 2 enormous pizza-like bread ovens. They were fired from the side in a normal old Bermuda oven. You put the fire in and then push it to one side, and you cook through the heat of the brick. Here, they had a coal fire on one side, which heated up the brick and kept it going. And they probably kept that fire going 24 hours a day, just threw in a little bit more coal, kept the brick hot. And they would have had very long spades to put in the dozens of loaves of bread, because these things are about 12 or 14 foot deep. When you get up on the hill, if you look back, you'll see a brick chimney. That was in danger of falling down with a donation from Mr. Jim Butterfield. We restored that. And the brick chimney is the chimney that belongs to these 2 ovens. So we could crank these things up tomorrow if we were in mind to do so. All right, so what you can do is come in and check out the brick ovens and come out and stand here. It's got a metal door on it, and that's earlier filling, early in the prison period. And the doors for the firebox are filled up as well. Come on in. Let's probably get everybody in. Come on in. Get on in. And so the flues for the smoke from the fire joined up here, and that's actually a dry inspection chamber on top of the flue for the smoke. And then from there, the flue goes about 40 foot back to the end of the building and up to the chimney on the ramparts. Now here, there would have been 2 metal doors, because this is the little firebox here, and you can actually see a bit of coal still left at the back of it. See that there? Some of you can see that. Okay? Yep. So these were completely unknown until we got the volunteers in here and started to take out the modern material. It appears what they did first was to build 2 vaulted rooms like that. You can see the arches like that. And then they inserted the ovens inside of it. And so, in fact, when you go through this hole here, you're looking down on the brickwork on the top of the oven, so it's all sort of unfinished because there's no reason to finish it, but all beautifully done. Now, just while we're here, this building was added This is the original building here, and this one we're in was added because that stonework there is an outside corbelled drain on the original building. And you can see a straight joint down there where the stonework's been pushed up against there. The original building, the wall was almost 10 foot thick here to carry the weight of the casemated brickwork. And all of these buildings that you're going to see today are made out of the very hard Bermuda stone. And because the roof has been leaking, the same geological process that formed this stone is acting on the building on top here. So in other words, in 1,000 years from now, everywhere in the dockyard, they'll be painting the tops of the ramparts and everything to stop the rainwater from dissolving the stone, which is how Bermuda was built. This stuff has to be blasted out of the ground, and every one of these stones chiseled into shape. So that's why it took over 40 years to build all the stone buildings of the dockyard. But the happenstance, the geological happenstance, which we're very fortunate to have these monuments today, is the only place in Bermuda where this stone existed on the surface in quarryable amounts, was right here at the end of Ireland, Ireland. This has all been plastered over and so on, and we'll eventually scrape all of that stuff off. Okay. Oh, it's hot in here. Let's go outside. When you come past here on the way back down the hill, you can look into this hole here. I'll explain what happened. When we took down the old prison wall, the digger driver didn't have anything to do because he was waiting for his machine to take him away. So I told him to have a poke just behind where you're standing there. So we were digging in all this heavy rubble like the stuff underneath of me here. And we were digging. We went down about 10 foot, and all of a sudden the side of the hole fell in on two sides. And on one side we saw a wall that looked like that, and the other side was a boundary wall which went from the other corner of this building over to the corner of that building. This was totally unexpected, so we did a bit more digging, and it looked like the building had a basement room because it had a ventilator going onto the floor and so on, and we had no idea it was here at all. Prior to that, we were using some volunteers from Excel. We discovered a tunnel underneath this building here, which was a type of tunnel that you would use under a defensive ditch. So we began to get indications that the original defenses, the fort of the dockyard, was not where it is today on the other side of this building, but was right here. And the original ditch for the dockyard, the defensive ditch you have to get into and come back out of, your enemy, actually ran from where you're standing up over the hill where the Casemates Barracks now is. So a couple months ago we came to find the other end of the tunnel. And there you see it there. That takes you 70 foot that way, and in the tunnel on the way you have these ventilators which would have gone up into the floor of the ditch to give you air and light. This is so constructed that there must have been either a rampart or a building on top of this, all related to the original fortifications. And that was then blocked up, and then a road was built in here. So you see this is the only cobblestone road in Bermuda, I believe. This probably dates from about 1815, the earliest days of the dockyard. Now you can have a look at this when you come back on again, because the best place to see it is down there. It includes land drains on the side of it, which you'll be able to see from over there, including one where the stone has been hollowed out and holes have been put in it so the water will run down into that. So we pulled those stones up last week, and we cleaned the drains out. The drains in perfect condition and still basically working. There's a blocked doorway in this room here, which you can see there. So what we thought was a basement room of this building here is actually the ground floor, and the ground originally was 8 foot lower than where you're standing. Now we had no idea any of this stuff was here, so what it indicates, what we've got to do is strip this whole area to find out all the rest about this building and everything that's going on here, because obviously this road here goes under here somewhere. And we're going to have to go and follow that up before we then come back and backfill it all and decide how we can maybe keep that tunnel and so on. So this is beautiful Bermuda archaeology, beautiful Bermuda stonework, soft stone on this side, hard stone on that. You see the lime mortar here, it's got a lot of pink fragments in it. That's where they've broken up the old bricks and pottery and stuff like that and put it in for a bit extra grubbing and to make it a little bit stronger. So this is wonderful. The first period of the dockyard, because there was a whole dockyard that existed for almost 30 years before they built all the stone buildings there today. So there were two buildings with clocks in it, the present one and then there was an earlier one that stood behind it, and at one point in the 1850s both clock towers were standing there together. So this would have been a good excuse for the workmen to leave whenever the other clock, because they wouldn't have been keeping the same time, the moment it struck early, you're out of here. Okay, now we've got a big group, so we're going to go from here and we're going to make our way right up on the roof, and we're going to take both stairwells. So Howard and Francis, can you take some people to the far side, and I'll take some to the steps here. So half of the group's going to go with Howard and Francis just to save a bit of time. We're standing on the roof of the Casemates Barracks, which is called a well roof, made for the purpose of being able to stand up here as everyone's doing today. And around the perimeter of it there's two sets of steps, or two steps. These were firing steps, so you could in fact use this building as a fort. So you could get up on the firing steps and fire across the top of the building at the enemy, but generally speaking would be coming from Mangrove Bay Way. And they would be Americans, and they would have landed on the beaches of the South Shore and be making their way through Southampton and Sands Parish to attack the Dockyard. So this building could be used as a fort as well as a barracks. So check out all four sides, get the views, and we'll eventually all go back. Those who came up this way can go down the other way, or those who came that way can go down this one. We'll walk through the building and go out the far side of the building. So check out the views, best views in Bermuda. Once you get on the other side of the little bridge, it's all soft stone.
Yes.
So this is one of the oldest parts of Bermuda. And it's the only, see if you go down to Walsingham where this, what this stone is named for, down Tom Moore's, there's a very hard rock there and lots of caves. Well, the problem with quarrying is there's too many caves and you're almost down to sea level. So you can't get any stone in bulk. It is not a very good stone to work with because it's not formed under the water, it's formed in the air. So it's got a lot of holes and impurities in it. So you could be carving away on it and all of a sudden the thing will crack on you and you start all over again. But they eventually managed to do all of this, and even that little stair there, you see that stair is, that little arch stair, that's all Bermuda stone, except for a couple of pieces of yellow you see on the steps, which is York stone, imported stone from England. Called the Upper Ordnance Yard. So originally these were for testing gunpowder and storing muskets and that sort of thing. And if you want to go and look in this, go through this door here and then go to the room to the left, you'll see a beautifully preserved two-story gunpowder magazine. You can jump on the original floor. It's been there since 1840, still as good as it's made. And it hasn't been painted over. So go through and then to your left and check it out. in the first 50 years or so, 100 years of the Dockyard, the only way to get to the upper grounds of the museum and the commissioner's house was to come up the road you've come up, down here, turn the corner, and go straight down this rampart, and at the very end there was a little foot drawbridge, just wide enough for a person to walk across. And it had a bronze mechanism in it, so you could actually crank it back and withdraw it into the great fort or the keep. The Maritime Museum is the largest fort in Bermuda, 10 acres, and the only way to get to the upper grounds was to come up this way and go down and across there. So we want to reinstate that, and you can imagine for walking tours and Segway bike tours and the directorial golf cart, it's going to be a wonderful road here. And so the idea is to join this back up, as it were, as an architectural setting, and so the museum would be everything down at the far end, plus all of these buildings here. And this is obviously a long-term project, but the museum was started 35 years ago, and took us quite a while to get the commissioner's house done. But that was a difficult building compared to these buildings. These buildings are very, very simple. They're big buildings, but repairing them and everything like that is very, very straightforward because they're so well constructed. And so anyway, the road we put back here, and we want it for safety purposes anyway, because the commissioner's house has a wooden roof and a major investment in the building there, and we can't get the fire trucks in the museum anymore because they're too big. I had to go through the tunnel into the lower yard because that was the ordnance yard for the sea service. That's where they kept all the gunpowder for the ships, and only the people who worked in the magazines were allowed in that yard. So you couldn't go through the yard and up the hill to the commissioner's house. You had to come here. And in those days, everything would have been on foot. You couldn't even use a horse because you wouldn't have been able to take a horse across the little drawbridge. Later, the gap was widened. You actually see the gap there at the end. The gap was widened so they could take a horse and carriage through here. And again, we rent the commissioner's house for a lot of weddings and stuff like that. So if you can imagine the wedding promenade carriage, horse and carriage, come down here, down the rampart, and up to your happy destination or whatever, and you're at the commissioner's house.
Wow.
Okay. Now look, we have unfortunately the crowd's too big today. We were thinking of taking you down the tunnel. We'll have to do that another time. We have smaller groups, but behind us here, there's a tunnel underneath the ditch, which is on the other side of all these buildings, and out into the little outwork fort called the Right Advance. If you want to have a look at that, you can just go up in this grass mound here and look over the wall. The Right Advance was originally 3 different gun emplacements, and the first one was originally a cave with a mouth open to the north looking this way, and all the Royal Engineers did was wall up the mouth of the cave, put a couple of gun ports in it, so when you go in there you're in this gun room, and all on top of you all these huge stalactites and stalagmites. Wow. So very organic architecture, as the architects say. So anyway, if you want to just nip up there and have a look, you can see it. The view is now somewhat obscured by a sewage treatment plant, but we still haven't got it, quite right to blend things in with historic stuff, but it's all right. It still looks good. So anyway, I think we got to end the tour here because you're going to go up to the museum and you'll be seeing 2 things up there in 2 groups, and some of you go up to the house and then come back to the cave. The cave is a brand new exhibit. It contains all the beautiful Bermuda cedar artifacts that the Boer prisoners of war made here in 1900 to 1902, and it also contains carvings that the convicts who built a lot of these buildings and were put in old ships here carved as well. And then at Commissioner's House you have to see the Great Mural, which has just been finished for the 400th anniversary of Bermuda. It's over 1,000 square foot of painting about the history of Bermuda. Fantastic thing. And we're going to be making a children's history book out of it, which will be given free to children when they come in, and every year for the next 5 years or so, a group will be distributed at the beginning of each school year to the relevant age group and so on. So with that, the Commissioner's House is basically now finished, and I thought my staff didn't have enough to do, so that's why we were thinking about taking over all of this here, to keep us busy. Idle hands make for whatever. Anyway, I want to thank you all for coming, and it's great to see the interest in the Casemates Barracks, because when we did this tour the last time, we only had about 1/3 of the number of people. So thank you all for coming out, and we'll definitely do it again. And if we do smaller groups and we're able to get into some places that we can't really do with a large group, it just takes too much time to move people around. But thank you very much again, and this is all a part of your heritage. No matter who designed these buildings, these are all Bermuda stone.
Very interesting indeed.
Let's go down to the high cave. I'll count off 20 for one room, 20 for the other. Have a look around, then I'll explain what it's all about. Okay? Good. Buried in unmarked graves on Ireland Island. They built the Casemates where we've just been. They built this dockyard, except between the period of 1809, 1820, when slaves and other Bermudians and what have you, a whole hodgepodge of people built the dockyard until 1823. But this is the product of 40 years of labor. The story begins on this panel and tells you how the war started, how they came to Bermuda. 4,619 prisoners of war. The first lot came on a ship called the Armenian in May 1901. The British authorities in Bermuda had only 3 months to get these camps sorted out on the Great Sound. The youngest prisoner was 6 years old. The oldest was 78. The youngest prisoner was the age of these little children here. It didn't matter to the British what you were up to. If you were capable of helping the British Army, capable of helping the Boer commandos in their fight against the British, you could become a prisoner of war. Schulenburg was the prisoner of war who on Burt's Island is responsible totally for this carving association. And these wonderful things were made over a period of about 2 years. The craftsmanship in Bermuda cedar is the finest I've seen anywhere in many places in the world. Not only that, they worked in bone. The bone was from their rations. They had their beef bone at supper, then they carved a brooch in the following morning. They were that adaptable. 90% of these 4,000 prisoners were Afrikaans speaking. They spoke a form of Dutch. Many of them had never seen the sea before. The first time they'd come to Bermuda, it was the first time they'd left South Africa. And it was a totally alien experience to them. 8,000 miles from their homeland. Others had been sent to St. Helena, Ceylon, India, but this was the farthest port of call for these prisoners of war. Suffice to say, the 4,000 who lived here, only 35 died. Meanwhile, back in South Africa, 27,000 Boer South African men, women and children died in concentration camps, and at least 20,000 black South Africans, and the number they're still counting today. Yes, sir.
On the trip over, did they have many casualties on the trip over?
There is a memorial, there's a Boer cemetery on Long Island, and on the way over, 10 prisoners died en route. The trip took 6 weeks, and it was in an old freighter they brought them over on. The 4,000 were brought over a period of 8 months, 800 the first batch. The last came here in January 1902. When the war ended in 1902, the British required the commandos to sign an oath of allegiance to the King of England. Those who did not sign were sent to Hawkins Island. By 1903, there were 80 left on Hawkins Island. When those refused to sign and the British got fed up with them there, they brought them ashore at the RASC wharf, which is Hammer Galleries. They dumped them on the dockside there. The following day, the Bermuda police, which employed me for many years, arrested 50 of them and put them in court for wandering abroad the following day. Having said that, Anna Maria Adabridge and one or two other people employed a number of them, and they opened up a cedar souvenir carving shop opposite the Shell gas station where Bermuda Island Cruises had a yellow cottage, which for many years was their tourist base. That was the place where some of these souvenirs were made. So have a look around at this wonderful collection. It's the finest in the world other than in Bloemfontein. Okay? That Bermuda will be an option, and if it wasn't Bermuda, it was Australia. So the unlucky ones got the long haul, the lucky ones got the 7-year stretch in Bermuda. Only one prisoner convict remained in Bermuda. He was able somehow to wangle his stay here, and he opened up a carriage business, and he was very successful. But primarily British convicts. There's a debate about how harsh conditions were. Some say that they were brutal, others say, and there's a very good book by Mrs. Hallett, which says that conditions were somewhat more amenable than is addressed in some books. But this is their story, and that's what they made. Any questions?
Yeah, we've got one here.
Yes.
Ellis Island Prison.
They make reference to a prison. Convicts began building the new barracks.
Yes. They were the prisoners, the convicts were originally on the Royal Naval hulks. There was the Tenedos, the Dromedary, the Coromandel, the Weymouth, and the Antelope. And it was on HMS Antelope in 1823 that the first batch of 300 convicts came here. And they were accompanied by a section of Royal Marines. So HMS Antelope brought the first convicts to Bermuda. Yes, you're right. Initially they were on these hulks. And then as the years went by and the hulks deteriorated and rotted away, they built barracks for them on Bowes Island. Mm-hmm. And they also, there is a small cemetery to the convicts. Behind Albert Row, there is an engine house with a chimney. Mm-hmm. Do you know it? It's been refurbished. Yeah. That was built by convicts. It is similar to the engine houses you find in Cornwall, in England, in the industrial Hudson Valley in the United States, a stone building with a chimney. That is a wonderful place to go and have a look at. There's a young Bermudian has refurbished it. He's got a fish processing plant there, but that is a fine example. Right next to that engine house is the convict cemetery, and I think there are 5 legible grave markers. So when you're around here again, just veer off at the end of Albert Row, turn left, take the side road, and there's the convict cemetery dead ahead. It's well worth a visit.
Okay, the question is, whatever happened to the original prison?
The original?
Well, when I say the original prison that they refer to building on Bowes Island.
It's in ruins. The footmark is still there, but it's nothing like Casemates. Okay. No. I tell you what, though, when you come into this section of Bermuda Island, Watford and Bowes Island, you will see what they look like little round forts. Those are bathhouses. Mm-hmm. Those are convict bathhouses. That is where they had ablutions and bathed in the sea. So there are remnants of their life here. Mm-hmm. Just west of Watford Island is on Bowes Island. There is a small cemetery just over Watford Bridge. Go up there, and in the military cemetery there is one convict grave. One convict is buried there. The tombstone reads, "Held in high regard by his peers." I think his name is Richards. It's well worth a visit. One of the most obscure and isolated cemeteries in Bermuda. It's near the water tank. Look at the water tank, take the path up, and you'll go to a very fine military cemetery. Okay? Any other questions? Good.
I'm going to talk about the dockyard, of course, but I'm going to sort of lead up to it, and I'm going to talk about a number of subjects, and I'm going to I'm just going to scratch the surface on some of these subjects, because if I get into too much detail, then